Well, welcome everybody to uh, the penultimate installment of our reading of The Old Curiosity Shop. I'm going to wait a couple of more minutes before I turn things over to Wayne, who is discussion leader today. And Wayne is here, but he appears on the screen as Charles Sullivan. But we know Wayne, our loyal president, and the one who selected the Old Curiosity Shop to pair with George Eliot's Silas Marner. And after next month's session will be our final session on Curiosity Shop. And I will be leading the discussion. The date of that is the 27th of April, I believe. Yes, the 27th of April. So we will be focusing on the final section of Curiosity Shop and also looking at the novel as a whole. So, Wayne, I think I'll turn things over to you and let you go ahead. So, thank you, Wayne.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. We can.
Okay. I'm having trouble changing my name. I did it last time, but forgotten how. I wanted to just begin with a very general question. Is the Old Curiosity Shop getting better as we read? Or is it getting worse? And if so, how? I'm finding it getting better myself. But any thoughts about this? Just very general opening question.
As usual, raise your hands and we will call on you in order. David.
David, yes.
Okay. I thought in rereading this section that the vitality is all in the London scenes, that the ones involving little Nell, it's not as alive.
Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, let's see if I can. Just the little Nell scenes seem to me to lack energy. And the business involving Swiveller and Samson and Sally and Quilp is just sparkling with energy. I don't know if that helps.
You're talking about the narrative energy and the energy of the writing, the prose. I think is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good start. We'll maybe circle back to it. So, Glenna.
Well, I will concur with what David said. Things happen to Kit, and we see I had reread this novel in many years, and I kept seeing references to Dick Swiveller as this lovable character. But when you first meet him, he's not lovable; he's a jerk. And in this section, he becomes lovable. So you have character development in Dick Swiveller. You have things happening to Kit. You have all kinds of things going on. Whereas saintly little Nell, things happen, but you don't get a sense of forward motion because there she is going to another cemetery.
Yeah.
Foreshadowing what is to be. And so, just giving a little bit more, perhaps specific detail to the larger point that David had made.
Okay. Barb?
Well, I also agree with David. I had forgotten the whole bit about the £5 note and how that plot just makes kind of no sense how that all plays out, and I had not remembered about it at all, and he flushes out Kit in that courtroom scene, I think, in a very odd way too. We're accustomed to him being sweet to his mother and so on and so forth, and in that scene, yeah, Dickens is trying to make him a kind of a country bumpkin, which we already know, but I mean, I don't know, it doesn't seem to work for me.
When you say it makes no sense, what do you mean by that?
Well, on the base level, beautiful Sally and I mean they're funny. They're very funny, you know. The Sally is the man of the house, and Samson is such an idiot, and you know they're very funny. But when they have this scheme, the two of them, I don't. It doesn't seem in keeping with where he was going with those two characters.
Okay. I'm interested that you think of them as a comic pair, as a kind of duo.
Well, they're not upstanding. They're not the Garlands or anything like that. They're not philanthropic and loving or anything, but just calling her lovely Sally all the time is kind of amusing, because every description we get of her is certainly not of a lovely person.
Okay, we'll probably have to come back to Sally's role. Kathy?
I would just say from the last comment that, you know, Dickens is switched sexuality. The male, you know, brother is more of a female character, like he's just following Sally, who's the leader, and she, you know, she's the dominant person, but she's also, you know, she's a villain. But as far as the, you know, hiding the $5 in the hat, I had to really follow that carefully. And, you know, picture it like sort of scene by scene, like how she got the $5 in there. I didn't really suspect that she was the person that did it. And back to as it got more vibrant, yes. I mean, I'm you know, I haven't read it for a real long time either, and I found the last chapters like really great. I really like reading them. I was like, what's going to happen next? Which I haven't, you know, really felt a lot during this. And compared to Little Nell, yeah, I mean, she's dying. And so he, you know, she's always in the process of dying, whether it's cemeteries or being in bed or, you know, talking in a slight voice. But I don't find that, I feel like that's in character. And the, you know, in the end, the, you know, the villain really comes out. She's of course not the only villain, you know, I always get confused about, you know, the main villain. Is he really a person or is he an animal? Because, you know, in the end, he's howling just to, you know, take off pressure. So I'm not sure what he is. But she's a sub villain, and then, you know, the brother's the fool. But it's all very, it's both comical, certainly with Sally and her brother, and it draws attention, at least from me.
Okay. people are agreeing with David. So, Mary.
I agree with Glenna's comments about Richard Swiveller. I wasn't quite sure what to make of him either, because towards the beginning I thought he was going to be one of the bad guys.
Yeah.
And he ends up, at least so far, we haven't completely finished the novel, but he ends up being a good guy. Thanks in large part to a wonderful creation of Dickens, The Marchioness. I think it was just really, really very good. I guess I didn't really realize just how terrible Samson Brass and his sister were, because it didn't catch on to me why he kept giving Kit money. I should have realized that he had an ulterior motive, because he is basically a very dishonest person. And then he somehow worked in the trick about the £5 note in the hat. So yeah, no, that's it.
Okay. David, we'll come back to you.
Okay. I'm reminded of something G.K. Chesterton said. He's one of the first really good Dickens critics. And if I remember correctly, it was he who said that the comic characters in Dickens are wonderful until he gives them something to do in the plot, and then they stop being themselves.
It's an interesting comment here.
And how does that apply to this novel?
Well, I was thinking of somebody said something that brought that to my mind about Samson and Sally.
Okay, we'll come back to them again. So, Pat?
Yes. I really enjoyed these chapters. I was glad for the break from Nell and the grandfather. And these chapters almost could have been a standalone short story, I thought. And I really got to appreciate Dickens' observation of human nature and development of those observations. I thought the writing was really stunning in this particular section, and I'm kind of surprised that y'all divided it this way, because to me it almost could have been a short story unto itself. There was like I finally looked at one sentence that probably was a half a page long without getting to the point of the end of the sentence, and that astonished me too. I really liked this section, and I was glad for the break from the dying Nell. That's my opinion.
Okay. A break from the dying Nell. And if the book was losing energy, it's at least in part because Nell is losing energy. We have to remember that. Okay, Sarah.
I just want to refer, so we talked about characters that we expected them to be bad, like Rick, and they turn out to be good. And there was in the previous session about Nell, there was a sentence about her grandfather that starts appreciating her. And there is a very nice a quote that says, "There are chords in the human heart, strange, varying strings, which are only struck by accident." And then he explains that we have chords that are sometimes dormant and something happens and we become a different person. And in that section, the chord refers to the grandfather who starts understanding the sacrifice that his Nell did. But it also applies to other characters. if we say, for example, that Rick seemed to be not a positive character, and suddenly he shows emotions, maybe the accident that happened or the event that happened that hit his code is the acquaintance with a slave girl, with a little girl.
Yes, you call her a slave girl, and
no, what the girl, Sally's daughter, the girl that works for the Sally, yeah.
No, I was just going to comment on the fact that she's not literally a slave.
Yeah, I know.
But the slang term for a maid of all work, that is the domestic servant in the Victorian period, is a slavey. And there's a real sense in which she is enslaved by the Brass family. She's locked in the basement, in the kitchen, basically, and she has a story that is a runaway story. So we this is slavery is a prominent topic in the novels of the 1840s and 1850s in England as well as in the United States. Remember, this is the time of Uncle Tom's Cabin, 10 years later, and we have a runaway slave in this novel. So, but anyway, the Marchioness deserves attention, as does Dick Swiveller. So yes, Kathy.
I was just going to add that I think what happens in the latter part of the book is there's character transition, and Dick is really there's a big transition in his character, because he's the guy that you think is part of the sister and brothers plot in a negative way, and he turns out to have compassion and get the Marchioness, all the things he does. And I think Pip does too. I really don't think that I thought Pip was great in the end. And, he continued to, I thought he grew up and, he became more of an adult. He wasn't what, both he and Nell are, which just teenagers. He was really taking the role of being an adult, and but Dick was much more of a transitional character. And I guess you could say in the opposite. Obviously, I don't think that the legal couple ever came off as good anyway. They were nasty, and they became criminals. So I guess you could look at them as transitioning, but certainly Dick does.
Wayne, have we responded adequately to
yes.
opening
yes.
question? Yes.
I don't know if Ava is here. She has my slides. Or Courtney.
I don't see Ava, and I'm surprised. I would have thought that she would be with us. So we may have to improvise without your slides.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I was interested in the discussion because in this particular part of the novel, there are two strands. Really, the development of the relationship between Dick Swiveller and the Marchioness on one hand, and then the arrest and conviction and then later exoneration of Kit on the other. So these are intertwined, of course, at a point when Dick and the Marchioness find a way to exonerate Kit. But several people pointed out, I think this could be a short story on its own. It's very well constructed. The other factor that came out in the discussion I thought was particularly interesting is that these developments in this particular reading, this is chapters 56 through 68, provide some much needed relief from the drawn out decline of little Nell in print. These chapters are full of energy. I think this might be one time I want to point out a particularly wonderful example of Dickens at work, and that's chapter 61. Chapter 61 is the visit of the Nubbles to Kit in prison. And I happened to be fortunate enough to work with another teacher who was a novelist. He's published two novels now. But when he came to our school, which is old-fashioned, he had to teach Dickens for the first time. And he later remarked that reading and teaching Dickens really taught him how to write novels himself. So this chapter 61 begins with a long authorial comment about innocence. But this is, of course, a very emotional time. Everybody's crying, and at some point, the turnkey tells them not to cry. They're wasting their time. But then we learn that the turnkey, I guess that's how it's pronounced, the turnkey, is reading the newspaper. So during this visit, he's occupied with the newspaper. And a part of it is his amusement at what he's reading in the newspaper, which conflicts with, of course, the terrible grief of the Nubbles. But in addition to that, we discover that the baby has been looking for some caged animals behind the bars and not finding them. So, and then we have Mrs. Nubble's concern to get food to Kit and see him take a bite. And the turnkey finally complies and allows her to watch Kit eat some of the food. So there's all this going on during the visit. We get the point of view of little Jonas and the baby, Jacob, and the baby at different times during this tearful interlude. And then the chapter ends with Kit receiving some beer from Dick Swiveller. So someone mentioned that Dick is one of the characters who develops in the course of the novel. So that development is carried out here at the end of this prison visit. Kit receives a surprise gift in this way. The chapter is wonderfully balanced and varied. Several things going on, different points of view, and shifting focus. I guess a second approach that I had in mind for this part of the novel is kind of goes back to what you, John, said during our first discussion about this being early Dickens, and Dickens is having to kind of invent his novel form as he goes along. I wanted to expand on that point a little bit, because Dickens had, of course, a model before him, which was Henry Fielding. And we know, there's no doubt that Dickens admired Henry Fielding, because he named his eldest son Henry Fielding, about the only son that he seems to have respected. But I think I once threw a Victorianist into a rage by suggesting that we need to look at Henry Fielding, and particularly his known novel, Tom Jones. And the interesting thing for us, I think, is that in Tom Jones, Fielding did two things. It was published in 1749, and it's both. It's a kind of a road story. For much of the time, Tom is on the road between Somerset and London, and that's not all. Dickens had, of course, was quite clearly imitating Cervantes. But in Tom Jones, Dickens invented what we call, or some critics call, the recursive plot. Recursive plot is one that has some secret elements, things to be revealed that will tie everything together. So we talked a little bit about trauma plot in A Tale of Two Cities, where there's some terrible event in the past that will eventually be revealed and explain much of what is going on. Now, I can't fully reveal the past plot because we haven't technically read it yet. It comes up in the next session, which John will cover. It's not traumatic, but it attempts to tie together various aspects of the narrative. Now, the interesting point, though, in this section is that Dickens is trying to weave back into his earlier sections the recurring story that will involve, I can say, the single gentleman, of course. And to do that, it required some skill. Earlier in Oliver Twist, I think we will probably all reread Oliver Twist, which is being revived. The musical is being revived again in London, I understand. Musical from about 1860. But in Oliver Twist, Dickens really started out in an episodic manner and then decided to work out a more elaborate recurring plot, which gives Oliver a backstory regarding the secret of his birth and his claim to an inheritance. So the scholars have gone back and looked at Dickens' revisions of Oliver Twist and shown how much work Dickens really had to do to work in this backstory or recurring plot involving Oliver's birth and inheritance. In The Old Curiosity Shop, Dickens was, I think, working on the same problem, starting out with an episodic story and then organizing it by means of the backstory or the recurring plot. I think he does so fairly successfully. And there's one major hitch over the identity of the single gentleman. Now, I don't know if I'm giving away too much, John, if I talk about the really awkward effort Dickens made to explain the single gentleman. I think it's in issue 45 of Master Humphrey's Clock.
Yeah, we haven't gotten there yet, so
We haven't gotten there yet.
it would be a spoiler to say too much.
I won't go any further. No.
Okay.
No. But that next time we can talk about what admittedly was a pretty desperate move to explain the identity of the single gentleman.
Well, you're right, of course, that one of the mysteries, if we can say that there's a mystery in the Old Curiosity Shop, is the identity of the single gentleman, because
absolutely, yes,
he's never given a name, he's never given a backstory. One of the things that we are always reading for in this novel is a rescue plot, and one link between the Kit story and the Nell story is that there's a rescue of Kit, and the single gentleman is one of the people who is involved in the rescue of Kit. I mean, it's mostly the Marchioness and Dick Swiveller who instigate that, but with the information that they provide, the group of rescuers are able to exonerate Kit, and save him. So in the back of our minds, we modern readers may find Nell's story lacking in energy, but we have to remember that the 19th century readers were eagerly awaiting a resolution to the Nell plot. They were, and Dickens's strategy here is the old melodramatic strategy of keeping Nell off stage for I counted the chapters, but it's something like 2 months, 9 weeks of chapters in which there is no Nell, and scarcely any mention of Nell. And some modern readers may find that a relief, and now we're reading something that has more energy and more comedy in it. But many 19th century readers are wondering where Nell is, what's happening to Nell, and that item of suspense is one of the things that is keeping people buying copies of Master Humphrey's Clock every week. Are we going to find out what happened to Nell? So I think we need to try and put ourselves back into the frame of mind of those 19th century readers and see the connection between the short story that is interpolated into this section of the novel and that other main plot that many Victorian readers are on the edge of their seats to find out what happened. So, David.
Okay. I'm glad Wayne mentioned Fielding. I picked up a Fielding echo in this rereading that I'd never noticed before, which is an echo of Fielding's novel, mock heroic novel, Jonathan Wild. Page 454, which is in chapter 60. The virtuous Sarah, moved by stronger feelings, and having at heart perhaps a more jealous regard for the honor of her family, flew from her brother's side without any previous intimation of her design, and darted at the prisoner with the utmost fury. It would undoubtedly have gone hard with Kit's face, but that the wary constable, foreseeing her design, drew him aside at the critical moment, and thus placed Mr. Chuckster in circumstances of some jeopardy. I don't know how many of you know Jonathan Wild. Wild is a fascinating 18th century character. He was a receiver of stolen goods, an organizer of burglaries, and he set himself up with the self-given title Thief Taker General. If you had your stuff stolen, you went to see Jonathan Wild, and he would say, oh, yes, he thought he could find it. And he'd probably organized the theft. He'd certainly received the stolen goods. There's an economics term I can't think of for a business that involves everything fitting together neatly. Because people came to Wild to get their goods back, he could tell if any of his burglars were holding anything back from him. And if any of them were unproductive or troublesome, he turned them in for the reward, and they got hung. And he got, I think, 40 pounds per neck. Anyhow, one of my favorite sentences from Jonathan Wild, the he in the beginning is Mr. Wild. He, in a few moments, ravished this charming creature, or at least would have done so had she not, by a timely compliance, prevented him. Somehow, I was getting an echo of that in the passage I just read you. So now I hope you'll all go out and read Jonathan Wild.
One other echo in the passage that you select of Fielding is that ironic use of the heroic epithet, the virtuous Sally.
Yeah.
And that's something that happens throughout, and particularly with reference to Sally, who is the beautiful Sally, the lovely Sally, the virtuous Sally, and the inversion of the verbs that follow that. But yes, so thanks for that, David. Glenna.
This isn't the major reason I had my hand up, but apropos of the influence of Fielding, in addition to reading Old Curiosity Shop, I'm listening to Nicholas Nickleby on Audible while I work out on the treadmill. And I've just these long chapter titles in Nicholas Nickleby really bring back Fielding to me. I read a lot of Fielding, but I can't say for sure whether I read Jonathan Wild. I mean, I read, Tom Jones, but also A Voyage to Lisbon and, various other things. But the reason that I raised my hand is when you're talking about the rescue of Kit, I think that's what makes this passage so gratifying. Now, Nell is, so far as the reader knows at this point, in a safe place, but she's been in such peril. It's been so horrifying to think of this poor little girl with this, at best we can describe him as demented old man, and they're wandering around, and God knows what's going to happen to them, and she's exhausting herself. The reader feels great frustration. And then you have the segment where, a bad thing happens, but the character gets rescued. And it's really, really sweet relief.
Yes, so rescue is hovering in the background of the story, and a very gratifying rescue. So, Kathy.
Okay, so back to the rescue plot. I really expected, and maybe the Victorian readers did too, not just the rescue of her, like, coming to the church and having a place to, like, not have bleeding feet, but, I mean, to that there was gonna be some rescue beyond that, that there'll be compensation for the property, her she lost, and I initially, I know you don't wanna talk about the single guy, but I thought, "Well, who is he? Is he the brother, and wasn't the brother, like, a villain?" And or, he's the brother of somebody else. I know that we're not supposed to talk about it, but I thought he was the rescue too. And, to me, what happened here is that, like you said, she doesn't get mentioned for chapters after chapters. And then, to me, Dickens just kills her. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm being very blunt, but I was kind of disappointed, and maybe that's why the Victorian people waiting at the boat for the answer, were ready to kill Dickens. But
Okay, well, we haven't gotten to that
I
death
know, I'm
yet,
waiting.
but everyone knows it's waiting for us. So we have to uh, put ourselves back into the frame of mind of the Victorian readers who don't know whether she will survive or not,
Yeah,
and who are hoping that the novel, which has magical rescues of other characters,
right.
and happy endings that are, Kit back with his mother and Barbara's mother and Barbara and that sweet domestic scene. Uh, I looked back to see what the last chapter was in which Nell appears, and it's chapter 51, I think it is. Um, no, chapter 55. If you go back to Nell is not mentioned between chapter 55 and chapter 71
Yeah.
of the novel. It's 9 weeks of installments, almost 2 months, um, and uh, uh, that's a long time to make your readers wait for the outcome of the main plot of the novel. So uh, we have to read this both with our modern sensibility of relief, perhaps, that inevitable, tedious waiting for her to die. Uh, uh, it, it, it's we have to read for the suspense. And why do I buy my copy this week and there's no Nell in it? Why do I buy it next week? For 9 weeks we go on like that. Um, and so perhaps there is more than just a safe abode, but a reconciliation of Nell with the people who care about her, particularly Kit. So, Karen.
Hi. Um, this is linked somewhat with what we're talking about, but I'm going back to the single gentleman who is unnamed, who is this mysterious presence in terms of identity. And it made me mindful of all the unnamed characters in this text, or at least those without proper names, and what they exhibit. There's the schoolmaster, the young scholar who this time, I think he was called Harry. I saw that one little name squeezed in there, so he's not one of the unnamed. The single gentleman, the Marchioness, and it made me very conscious that I think these characters exhibit a lot of benevolence. These are kind characters who are unnamed. The grandfather's unnamed, but he's not so kind. And I wondered about that in terms of the early Dickens. It's almost as if these unnamed characters represent a sort of private charity that becomes more of his social institutional charity later in his novels. It seems to me that these good people can be seen as bordering on social institutions that come in his later works. They seem benevolent for the most part. to me, and I found that interesting. I know that the unnaming of them lends to the allegorical, but I see them also as just exhibiting private charity.
That word charity, I think, is the key to it. These are the phrase that I use for it is communities of care. These are people who care about the suffering that Nell is undergoing, and who are nameless because it's not their individuality, it's the fact that they belong to a community, a larger community that feels a kinship, a sense of human bonding with Nell and her condition. And there are other instances of named characters. I think particularly Dick Swiveller, in his relationship with the Marchioness, is a named character who fits into that pattern. And Dick Swiveller is I don't think we've talked enough about Dick Swiveller and about his. People have said that there's a development in his character, and I'd like to hear more from people, perhaps not right now because there are some hands being raised, but I think Dick Swiveller fits into that sense of community of care that sometimes doesn't require a given name in order to exhibit something that is positive about the world of this novel, which has so many things that are not positive. So, Sarah. Yes, unmute.
Regarding
it's okay, sweetie. It's all right. It's okay. Come here.
Regarding not mentioning Nell, he does mention it in his first day in jail, and he thinks about the different people, what they'll think about him, and he thinks about Nell. How will she react? And he misses her, and so she is mentioned, but it doesn't tell us anything new about her. It just, we already know much more than Kit knows about her at that point.
Yes, that's important. I mean, Nell does not appear in person, but the Kit is thinking about her.
Yeah.
So that's a reminder to the reader that we too should think about Nell. Nell has not disappeared entirely from the novel. So yes, good reminder. David.
I think there's a practical reason why the Nell thread is in suspense so long. It's a question of construction. If he finished off Nell's story at this point, how does he support the rest of the book? He has to let other events catch up with her. Since he didn't plan the book in advance, he's having to do repairs on the fly.
I think that's a good point. I mean, we need to remember the loose form, the improvisational nature of this novel, which unlike the later novels from Dombey and on, Dickens planned out in advance, had number plans for each monthly installment. This novel has no plan. It's Dickens working more or less on the fly and trying to pull the pieces of his novel together, and that gives this rather disjointed feel to the form of the novel. So, yes, Pat again.
Yes, I've been wondering because of the discussion. Do you think it's possible that Dickens could have flipped the ending, taken the end and put it where these chapters are, and taken these chapters and made them the end. I don't know, because we haven't gotten to it yet, and I personally never read the book before. So, and I'm sorry I won't be here next month. I'll try to get here, but I don't know. I'll be traveling across the ocean. So, am I asking a question too soon? Whether the chapters could have been flipped, but of course that would have taken away the mystery that all the people on the wharf in New York were waiting. I understand that it's the selling of the book. So because I haven't read the end, I don't, I sort of know what happens because of Nell thing, but could he have put these chapters at the end to get all those characters wrapped up before he got, and put Nell's, can I say demise? Sorry. Okay. Could he have flipped them in construction?
One of the questions that scholars sometimes debate about this novel is, when did Dickens decide that Nell would die? Did he know from the very beginning that Nell was going to die? Or did he hold out the possibility for himself, not just for his readers, that she might survive, or more than survive, have a happy ending, an ending that returns her to some sense of family or community? And did he know all along that she was destined to die? And now there's some people who say yes, he clearly knew that was going to be the end. But I think that in last month's discussion, when Nell finally reaches a resting place, she's no longer on the road. She's found with the schoolmaster an abode that her as long as she's on the road, she's still alive. When she gets to a place where all she does is to look down into that deep, dark well and mend the graves in the graveyard, I feel that's the point where Nell's fate is sealed, that Nell will not continue to be on the road. Nell has found her final resting place. And so I think that's where Dickens decides that she must die. So I don't think he had written or even imagined the final chapters until that point. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, but it's my belief. So Janet.
Yeah, well, I'm going to, go back to what David was saying, but also take perhaps a somewhat cynical view of it, that Dickens was probably committed to a certain number of episodes for this story, or a certain length of time that it needed to appear in the publication. And so he couldn't have Nell die any sooner or end the book any sooner, because he needed to fill up all of those episodes. And Dickens was nothing if not commercially minded in his writing. So that's my cynical take on that. The other comment I would make is that, I don't claim to be a Dickens scholar, but as to the question of did he know all along that Nell was going to die, I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. I think he was thinking about the tragic death of his sister-in-law, which, affected him for the rest of his life. And he always had this image of the saintly young woman who dies too soon. And I think Nell is just one of many examples of that in his writing.
that's a good argument for the opposite of what I was saying, and that Mary Hogarth's death looms over this book and determines the fate of Nell, and perhaps that's the case. Perhaps he was trying to imagine a different ending from the ending of Mary Hogarth. So I think it still is an open question, but certainly Mary Hogarth's death had a powerful effect upon him in his life, and perhaps in his book. About the commercial side of Dickens, he had no. He was the editor and of Master Humphrey's Clock, and so he had not committed to a certain number of installments that he would fill. He could keep it going as long as he wanted to, or cut it short whenever he wanted to. But so I think the delay is a strategic delay. How long could he keep Nell out of the story and keep selling, 100,000 copies a week? And he reached a point where he said, "I can't keep her out anymore. I've got to get back to her." So, Glenna.
Yeah, I find the whole idea that he kind of happened onto her fate, although I like what was just said about Mary Hogarth, but I keep thinking of the contrast between this novel and the death of Paul Dombey in Dombey and Son, which was a carefully plotted novel, as I understand, because the death of little Paul is foreshadowed immediately because his mother dies. He is given poor nurture. His father and the father's family all think more of the integrity, the valor of the Dombey name than they do of the fate of this poor little boy. And to me, the way that particular death is handled is so poetic and so beautiful. And I never got bored with, the lingering of Paul Dombey. This seems much more happenstance to me, but that's my take.
I think that Dickens learned from Old Curiosity Shop that the story of the death of a child is a good story to tell, and so he does a better job of that, or integrates that more skillfully into the planning of the novel than he does with Old Curiosity Shop, where either it's something that we know is going to happen from the beginning, or it's something that he sort of toyed with. Is there a way in which I can rescue her? It's Curiosity Shop is not as planned a novel as the later novels. That clearly is the case. But I'm interested in hearing more from people about Dick Swiveller. Do you enjoy Dick Swiveller? What is it that does he grow? How does Dick Swiveller fit into this novel? He's there as a character in the background from the very beginning, from chapter 1 of the novel, but for a long time I can't figure out what he's doing in the novel. Why is he there? Tell me your response to Dick Swiveller. Janet.
Well, I think Dick is there all along because there needs to be somebody on the scene of the crime who isn't involved in the crime. We need to have a witness to the crime.
And so Dickens has to place someone in the scene because, the idea that the Marchioness is going to be that person is just a little too far-fetched. So I think Dick has to be in the Brass office just for that purpose. Now, it is true that in the very first time that we see Dick Swiveller, he has a very different character, he's really part of a somewhat nasty plot to marry Nell and get their hands on the supposed fortune. But that aspect of his character seems to disappear at about the same time that he becomes a clerk in the Brass office. And his co-conspirator in that, Nell's older brother, just disappears completely. We never hear of him or about him again. He's just gone. So I think now as to do we like Dick? Yeah, I once he gets in the Brass's office, I found him a very interesting and enjoyable character to have around, especially his interactions with Sally. That was very funny.
Mm-hmm. Okay, those are all good points. Initially, he's there as part of a very suspicious marriage plot. He's being set up to marry Nell in order to get hands on grandfather's fortune, his supposed fortune, and he's in collaboration with that older brother who gets mentioned a couple of times later on, but who really isn't a character in the story in person. So, yes, Clark.
I'm just going to say, thank God for Dick Swiveller in this novel. He is a constant source of delight from the very beginning. Catherine and I were talking about from the beginning. This guy animates the scene. He's got a great wit. David, he kind of reminds me, since you're talking about Fielding, he reminds me of a kind of 18th century rake who's down on his luck in the early going. And I from the beginning, Catherine and I just felt like there was something going on there that could flash, that could come out in a very positive way, if only for his wit. But also, we were kind of thinking about Sidney Carton, another tippler who turns around with a little help from Cupid. But I just simply enjoy him for the liveliness he brings into the novel. So thank you, Charles.
Okay. Those are all good points, and I'd like to hear more about Dick Swiveller. So, Dorothy. And unmute, please. Not hearing you yet.
I see him as a fairy godmother. If the Marchioness is a Cinderella, then he is a fairy godmother. He certainly has grown since we met him first. And the dialogue and his wonderful feats of prose remind me of Woodhouse and Jeeves, and there's a joy and buoyancy about him. He's also kind. He sees that the Marchioness is hungry and gets her bread and meat, and he also even sends beer to Kit in prison. So he's an altogether lovely person by the time we get to this point in the novel.
Okay. Yes. He's a tippler, to use Clark's term. But his language and his wit and his sense of humor, his he not only feeds the Marchioness, but he teaches her to play cribbage. Ginny.
Yeah, I think he's really important because he ties so many different elements of the plot together. As you say, in the beginning he starts, being set up to marry Nell, but then Quilp places him in with the Samson Brass and his sister, so that ties that element. Then he ends up meeting up with Chuckster, and that ties him into that office and what's going on there. And then he, gets in with the Marchioness and Kit visiting. And so he's really important to tie all these different aspects of the novel together. And he's sort of taking care of all these individual things. He's picking up life for Marchioness, he's picking up life for Kit and coming to his rescue. But he's also, knows that Chuckster isn't the greatest guy ever, but it puts him in that office to sort of know what's going on there. And he's sociable about his drinking and everything. But, you don't ever forget that, Quilp is the person who put him in that office to be a spy. And yet he's gotten, caught up in the life of the office. The single gentleman, he knows about the single gentleman. So I feel like he's become critical because he has so many ties to so many different people because he's so social. And so I think that really, he's a critical part of the novel because he pulls so many people together.
Yes, excellent points. Yes, very good. Catherine.
Yeah, I agree with everything everyone said about Dick Swiveller. He's absolutely my favorite character, and I love how he has those crazy song references all the time, and it's like there's always a party in his head. Like he's like such an enjoyer of life. That's clear from the very beginning, and that never ends. Even when he meets the Marchioness, he wants to play cards with her. He wants to have a party, and that's just such a lovable. He's lovable, and I feel like he did, he was in this plot to marry Nell, but he has found his way to be better. And I feel like with the Marchioness, he really sees her. He's curious about her, and I think his curiosity about her makes him very loving. He was curious about Sally Brass too. He's curious about humanity, and I think he's just that kind of energy is just really fun to see.
I like your use of the word curiosity there too. So, yes, and I agree with you. Particularly, and maybe we should say a little more about his musical interests. But Gary first.
I love this character, and all of the above. And I would just add, one participant said that he was kind. And he certainly is. And I don't think he even knows he's kind. It's sort of he arrives at that at a certain point. And I love the interaction with Sally Brass and what he has anticipated in her, who is a very interesting character unto herself. I mean, she's turns out to be very masculine, and there's not an interaction with them that works at all. And then there's the Marchioness, who, of course, he's wonderful with. So. Yes.
What about Dick's musical abilities and interests, and what about his illness? Anybody have thoughts about those aspects of his character or his place in the plot? Kathy.
Well, I think, it's part of the transition that he makes as a character, in that he almost dies and then, is brought back to life and saves the day, really, in many ways, because, the Marchioness is helping him by telling the story that she got through the peephole. And so then he empowers her to run out the door and, get all the helpers to come in and solve the problem. But she was there. The illness, what that did was bring the Marchioness to help him. I mean, he wakes up and there's herbs all over the floor, and it smells like I just imagine a sweet sick room or something. The way all this, it was like a nurse was there And she came there to, I mean, obviously she was running away, but because he was kind to her, back at the evil house, she came to him. So, his illness really, was the transition both in him and in the plot to, speed on to a great ending.
Okay, very good. Janet.
Yeah, this is more of a question. There are untold numbers or examples of a character being transformed by illness, almost like they die and they're reborn.
Right.
It's a meme in Victorian literature, and I'm wondering, is this a very early example of that? Because Dickens certainly uses it in a number of his later novels, but so do many other novelists. So I'm just sort of questioning whether that was already, a recognized thing at the time this was written, that you get really seriously ill and come close to death, and then when you recover, you're a different person.
It's a familiar trope, and it's not original. This is not the first time that it occurs in literature. But I'm trying to think of a good example from earlier. David is usually the person who comes up with examples of this kind, but I can't think of the classic instance of it. But yes, there is I think its double function is both to be a strong transition point in Dick's life, and also to allow the Marchioness to emerge from obscurity and to become a nurse, to see that she's an active person, not just an obscure servant. And the Marchioness, I mean, we haven't really talked much about her either, but the Marchioness is a double of Nell. The Marchioness is a suffering child, but one who becomes active and purposeful in a way that Nell can't be. And so in the Marchioness, we see another possibility of hope, a possibility of rescue for Nell, and in a different personality. But Dick's music is another thing that doesn't change from the very beginning, and I think it's the thing that connects Dick to a kind of clownish figuration, that Dick is a clown in this novel from the very beginning. And I think it's my colleague John Bowen, who comes to Dickens Universe often, who said that Dick is kind of a human jukebox, that he's memorized every popular song of his era. And all you have to do is to provide him with an occasion and push the button, and Dick will come out with a song. And the fact that Dick sings and knows every lyric to the pop music of his era, and that he plays the flute even in his illness, is something that ties him to a character type that Dickens enjoys. And that's it's tied, if we go back to Pickwick Papers, to Sam Weller. I mean, he's a kind of clown figure, a joke figure, someone who's enjoying life, enjoys his drink, his tippling, and who likes to moisten his clay. That's one of the phrases that is used often about him. And to moisten your clay is a nice phrase, because your clay is, of course, your body, and it's the earth to which your mortal remains will end up in this novel about death. But Dick wants to moisten his clay, and every time he moistens his clay, he's enlivening it and enlivening the story. So, yes, Ginny, more about Dick.
I was going with more about the Marchioness, who.
Please.
Do we not think she's the child of Sally Brass and Quilp? I know there was some, talk about that because she's too short, she's too small, which is like the Quilp part, and she's kept locked up by Sally because she doesn't want anybody to know who she is. And the two of them, there's references off and on to them, yet Dickens chooses not to really say anything about it. I don't know. I feel like there's more to her than we're getting being said to us directly.
Wayne, do you want to weigh in on this?
I love it.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear.
Okay. Yes. I keep thinking of that scene. I do think that there's a strong hint that the Marchioness is the daughter of Sally Brass and Quilp. There's a fairly early scene where Dick Swiveller observes Sally Brass beat the Marchioness. It's a very upsetting scene. And all the narrator tells us in that scene is that Dick Swiveller could see that Sally Brass held some grudge against the little servant. That's all the narrator says. But I keep thinking there's a famous scene, I think, in Dostoevsky, where a character sees a man beat a horse to death, and it changes him. And I think that's what happens. That's part of Dick Swiveller's conversion. He sees something that he just can't take. He can't do anything about it directly, but it changes him. And it's just remarkable to me that Dickens leaves it to us to try to understand how Dick deals with that observation. But yes, I think Sally, sadly, is one of these people who resents someone who makes her feel guilty. We've all known them.
And there is evidence in the manuscript that corroborates this. And Dickens took it out. So we might ask ourselves why he took it out, why he left hints of it. When Quilp sees the little servant, he stares at her and asks her name, and he stares at her in a way that suggests that he recognizes something. And so, yes, it's not in the text. Dickens took it out. Perhaps the story of an illegitimate child was more than he wanted to put into the narrative. It's a curious omission. But yes, Kathy.
I was just laughing like crazy when she said that, because I can't imagine. I mean, Sally's like tall and, she's a directing woman. She's in charge. And Quilp, he's this short little guy or whatever he is. The coupling of these two people, just to me, is hysterical. And, I can see you saying clearly that, there's evidence that, that this was really true. But it's actually, to me, a hysterical truth. Like, who would think, that anyone would have anything to do with Quilp? But, she's Sally's like a dominatrix. I'm not saying that correctly, but, I just, in my mind, this is way too much to take.
Okay, we have some opinions about this. Dorothy.
Samson himself says to Quilp, if you and my sister got together, would have been an amazing combination.
Yeah.
That's all. Just wanted to mention.
Martha.
Assuming that this relationship was agreed to, she could have been raped by Quilp. He's a creep. He's always trying to find somebody else other than his wife to be around. So I don't know that she would necessarily have agreed to this relationship, and that could be why she's angry or seems angry.
Speculation about the whether it was a consensual relationship or not.
Correct.
I think we have to remember that this is not entirely a realistic novel. I mean, Quilp is not a realistic figure.
He's not.
Yeah. He's an ogre. He's a monster. And in a way, Sally is a monster too. I mean, the way that she is depicted. So we're in a realm that is fantasy, fairy tale, nightmare, something like that. That I think departs from, the kind of realistic world that you have in Trollope or in George Eliot, where you say, is it possible that this person and that person could have a sexual relationship and produce a child? We have to suspend our disbelief, I think, a little bit in dealing with these characters. This is Dickens, after all. Yes, Glenna.
Well, I'm glad we're finally talking about Quilp, because the Quilp is always an ogre, but that scene where he boils liquor, whatever that alcoholic beverage is,
rum,
downs it directly, I find that absolutely horrifying. I mean, we all, I think, have had the occasional moment of scalding our mouth because we try and drink coffee when it's too hot, but drinking, a fiery liquid that's just been on the fire, and then him forcing Samson Brass to do the same thing. It's like he's at this. I mean, there are a lot of things about this novel that are realistic. People did wander. Poor people did wander. But this episode, when Quilp downs the fiery liquid and then forces Samson to do it, it's like a scene. The one that comes to mind right away is The Master and Margarita, the Russian novel. I mean, it's this kind of bizarro, out of some depths of the imagination, rather than being a little girl wandering around England because she's so poor. And the energy of the Quilp character is so intense. Anyhow, it's a little jarring to me, but interesting nonetheless.
Yes, and there are moments early in the novel when Quilp is introduced where what he eats and drinks surpasses probability. I mean, he eats shrimp with the
shells
and the head and tail on. He drinks fiery liquids. He's from. It's not exactly a Gothic. It's a fairy tale ogre quality that he has. So. And Sally partakes of that same quality, I think. So in any realistic sense, it seems bizarre. But if we step outside of the probability and realism of much 19th century fiction, it's perhaps plausible. Kathy.
Well, they're both heartless. I mean, that the scene at the end where, the poor wife comes and, it's freezing cold and it's snowing and he's not going to even let her in. And then he lets her in and she's, oh, I'm wet, I'm cold. And, I'm glad you're cold. I'm glad you're wet. And the same thing happens with the sister in, that she rails at one point to the brother. I mean, she's talking to somebody else, and she's talking about the brother, and what an idiot he is, and I mean, she just has no compassion, no sense of, and neither of them do. I mean, they're inhuman, and they're monster-like in that sense.
Yes. And dare I say, we enjoy the energy of their monstrosity.
Yes, especially their mating. Oh my God.
It's over the top. I mean, it's what do people make of Quilp and that ship figurehead that he beats with the poker and drives a nail into the nose of the figure? Does anybody, I mean, he claims, not that I can tell it from anything in the description or in the illustration that accompanies it, that this is Kit. It's an image of Kit. But any thoughts about that figurehead, Ginny?
Yeah, Quilp is a sadist, and I think he has so much anger that he wants to vent that he takes that figurehead and he says it, it reminds him of Kit, so he doesn't have Kit there to beat up on, and he just keeps smashing it, and Brass is like can't get over how violent he is and driving nails in it. I mean, he is just really sick, and he's the whole book from the get-go, all he wants to do is inflict pain on people and sit back and laugh while they're experiencing the worst of their pain. Yeah. Like when Kit gets taken off to jail and they go by where he's, at the bar and he's like laughing about the whole thing. And he's like, oh, look at you, Kit, going off. Oh, isn't that terrible? He's such a sadist. And the violence, I think that part of the striking thing really just showed how terribly violent he was, because he was really putting a lot of aggression and beating that statue up. Besides drinking up his boiling alcohol while he was doing it.
Right. Violence, sadism, fairy tale, ogre, monster. Dorothy.
I was reminded of a scene from Roman history when Cicero has been assassinated and his head is nailed to the rostra, and Antony's wife comes with a long, something like a hat pin, and pierces his tongue repeatedly. It seemed the same kind of anger.
Sadism.
Yeah. David.
I think reading the newspapers has maybe affected my brain. But I'm wondering if anyone sees any resemblance between Quilp and Donald Trump.
Oh my God, yes.
I didn't see who giggled and said, "Oh my God, yes," but
yeah.
We can develop that idea, if you will. But Mary has her hand up.
Well, not to mention Quilp's attitude towards his mother-in-law. Now, I know mothers-in-law are maybe not universally popular, but this is beyond the pale. He wants the old lady to die.
Yes, yes.
I don't think he doesn't have any redeeming qualities. Can anybody find anything redeeming in him? I can't.
Well, Quilp is funny. He's a Punch figure from the Punch and Judy show. And at the beginning of the novel, I think we can laugh at his violence because his violence is so puppet-like. But the farther we get into this novel, particularly by the time we get to the scene with the ship's figurehead, it ceases to be funny. I mean, this is violence and sadism, and it's demented. It's an energy that comes from the diabolical. It's beyond human, and it ceases for me to have anything funny about it, and becomes grotesque and horrifying and threatening. So, but yes, there's someone else. David, were you had finished what you had to say?
Yeah.
I wanted to mention that he does have one redeeming quality. He seems to actually like Tom Scott. And there is a nice playful aspect to their relationship. And when you think about it, he's given Tom a source of survival money. Otherwise, he would end up like Joe in Bleak House.
There is a way in which the kind of childlike quality of Tom Scott mitigates somewhat the horror of Quilp's establishment.
Yes.
When in that horrible scene when Quilp retreats to the river, and he sends, I forget the exact sequence, but the thing that stands out in my memory is that Tom Scott walks on his hands and knocks on the window with his shoes.
Yes.
And it's a moment of pure playfulness, and Tom Scott is the playful side of childhood. But Quilp's childishness is just vicious meanness, with no charity and no sense of what Karen was talking about before, that community of care. I mean, the kind of care that Dick Swiveller provides for the Marchioness, for example, is impossible to consider with respect to Quilp. Glenna.
Well, I was just going to say, Tom Scott seems almost like a witch's familiar.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't mitigate the horror. It just, I don't know, it reinforces some of the darkness of this character that he's, he's somebody that would have been burned in New England in a certain period.
Yes. Pat, is your hand still up?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
I've been thinking as you've been discussing this, I wonder if Dickens got any grief because he chose to make the evil character someone who has a disability. He could have chosen any character to be the evil character, and yet he chose the dwarf. I just wonder if that's had any critique over the ages or even in the Victorian time, that why did Dickens choose someone with a disability to make the evil character?
Does anyone want to comment on this? Yes, Kathy.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
I would say to one of the previous questions, how is he like Trump? He is like Trump, because what has Trump done by getting rid of the whole education department, gotten rid of education for disabled children. So I'm sure Dickens didn't mean this. He had no ability to foresee it, but to me, there is a total connection between the two.
David.
I can't give you a good example, but there's a long tradition, particularly in the theater of the period, of the physically deformed people being villains.
Yeah.
Like a monk in Oliver Twist. He's not so much physically deformed, he's epileptic, but the idea is that the body reflects the state of the mind.
And of the soul.
Yeah.
Richard III seems the obvious parallel here.
Yeah. Good, yeah.
He could be Quilp.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there is also a dwarf in David Copperfield.
Yes.
She's a dressmaker, and I don't think there is anything particularly evil about her. I just wondered if Dickens himself knew any people who were dwarves.
Well, the example that you mentioned from David Copperfield, Miss Moucher, is a character who is a dwarf, and she was based on an actual person. She wrote to Dickens and objected to his portrayal of her in a way that suggested that she was a procuress, a kind of go-between who helped to seduce the Emily Peggotty, and through her lawyer objected, and Dickens acknowledged and said, just wait, and he turned her into a good character later on. So there were instances in the Victorian period where, but Quilp is an example of exactly what David said, that is the equation of bodily deformity with some kind of moral deformity or depravity. And it's a tradition that goes back to fairy tales and takes us out of the realm of the realistic and into folk attitudes and folk beliefs as well. But yes, Kath.
Yes, we know Dickens went to circuses where they had freak shows attached to them. And we know that in those freak shows, dark dwarfs were seen as evil. Well, Quilp is dark, isn't he? So he was a sort of little imp, a nasty little imp. I always think of Quilp as being.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in that sense, comes from the land of the fairy. The supernatural. He's a character who's on the border between, a character whom we can treat as a realistic figure and one who eats shrimp whole and drinks boiling rum and comes from another planet.
Rumpelstiltskin is his brother.
Something less than human about Quilp. Less.
Yes, exactly. David, you said
Rumpelstiltskin is Quilp's brother.
Yes, is his brother. Yes. Yes, Russell.
Maybe I'm missing something, but what I didn't understand about Quilp is that, he starts off getting involved in the story because of the money that Nell is supposedly going to inherit, and that's what so much of this story is about. But then he goes on to pursue her, and he knows that there's no money there, and so I keep wondering, why is he still involved? And so that's how Kit gets brought into this, because of Kit loves Nell and all that sort of thing. And to me, to some degree, the story starts to fall apart because I can't understand why Quilp is still doing all of these things. He is the prime motivator in this story, and yet he doesn't seem. I don't understand the motivation for him to keep continuing to try to track down Nell, to get even with Kit. It's to me, it doesn't hold together.
It doesn't hold together in any realistic sense, so we have to look for something beyond realism. Dorothy.
He says himself, Quilp, when he tells Brass to fire Richard Swiveller, that he knew they didn't have any money and he just wanted to get the grandson and Swiveller involved in it just for pure fun on his part. Yeah. It was evil. And now he knows that there might be some money because the single gentleman obviously has some, so he wants to call off that part of his plot.
Ernie.
This is pure speculation and so forth, but I know Dickens is really interested in childhood because of his background and everything else, and it's all in his novels. And when I see Quilp at the beginning or even through it, it's a simplified thing, but he's small. And same with the Marchioness. And I just wonder if there's, I could do psychological reading of it or something. But is Quilp, what was Quilp's backstory? Maybe he just has been abused and so forth in a past or something that. This is one reaction, maybe kids or children that are abused, or to just be totally angry and sadistic and so forth.
It's interesting that we have no backstory for Quilp. We know nothing. He has no past, no personal past, no biography. We don't know anything about parents. We don't know where he was brought up. He in that sense, he's sort of ageless. And I think that's part of the way in which he's beyond human. That he's a figure from an archaic formation, something in the unconscious, a figure that surges from the unconscious. He's not, and his motivation is missing. It's absent. I think it was David earlier in a previous month's session who said that he's motiveless malignancy, that he's like Iago in Othello, and he hates good people. He hates them because they are good. He hates Kit ostensibly because Kit once said to him, "You're the ugliest dwarf that could be seen for a penny at a freak show." And Quilp holds on to that remark and quotes it several times. He wants revenge, and revenge against anyone who has said anything negative about him. Perhaps another link with the current occupant of the house. Yes, Ginny.
I think Quilp is a master manipulator, and that's where he gets his enjoyment. It starts out as trying to arrange him to get Nell and to get the money, but what he really enjoys the most is manipulating everybody, and that's his motivation, which holds up all the way through. He's got the brother and Dick Swiveller at the beginning. He's got the grandfather under his thumb from the gambling. He's trying to get a hold of Nell. Then he moves on and puts Swiveller in with Samson and Sally Brass, and he tries to make them do his bidding with everything. He controls his wife and his mother-in-law. His whole thrill is being in charge of everybody and ruining everybody's life. He wants to be in charge and be causing everybody the most possible pain and suffering. And it's all his doing, and it makes him totally happy. He doesn't have to have money to be motivated. He's happy in other people's misery, and anybody he can make miserable makes his day. So I feel like he does have a motivation that holds up throughout the whole story because he's constantly looking to make everybody miserable. His wife, he does everything to make her miserable. You know, right from the end when he tells her to go out and try to find her way in the dark and try to remember the boards are nail up. So if you fall, it'll probably be pretty bad. Or he tells Samson Brass, you know, to look out for the dog. He lives on the left, but he could be on the right hiding for you. I mean, every little thing like that makes Quilp happy. There's so many examples of that throughout the book.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. The exercise of power and of his own cleverness in creating danger and pain for other people. And power is the power that comes from the ability to dominate over other people is an aspect of his sadism. So, Catherine.
Yeah, I'm just curious about what people thought about Quilp's death. I have really mixed feelings about it because on the one hand, he's so mean and awful, and I really wanted him to suffer more or have it like be a little more prolonged. And on the other hand, I was satisfied because he was totally alone when he died, and you know, he had like almost made it so that he couldn't be helped because he had barred the gates or whatever, and no one could come over to help him. But he just kind of disappeared. I don't know. I was kind of surprised by that. I'm just curious about what other people thought.
Yes, Quilp's death is something we should pay attention to. But I'm going to go to Dan for a second.
Yeah, I guess back to Quilp's motivation, it's really, it does come back to like what establishes this pathology. I mean, we don't get any background story of him. We get some speculation that he might be involved with, you know, Sally Brass. I mean, I don't know if that's been covered here, where he might be the father of the Marchioness, and
yeah,
you know, that's really the only detail we get. But I mean, in terms of his kind of pathology, I mean, where does that come from? Is it just because he gets called ugly, and you know, likely has experienced that his whole life? I mean, is it avariciousness? Is it perversion? I mean, is it, you know, what is it? And I think, you know, Dickens here is really trying to establish some, you know, some more depth in the kind of the behavior of the character, but he doesn't really tie that up with any kind of definiteness. And so, you know, it remains a little bit of a mystery.
I don't think we can do a psychological reading of Quilp. He's the embodiment of a particular form of pathology, rather than having there's no explanation for it. We can't trace it back to a trauma or you know, anything.
Like we can with later characters in Dickens, I think.
Exactly. Yes. Oh, Wayne.
Oh, yes, thanks. A little off topic, but I just wanted to point out that chapter 68, when Quilp drowns, is another marvelously written chapter, one that would be a wonderful model for any writing class. It is the description of the corpse at the end is absolutely stunning, I think. But yeah, just as a work of art, it is something to behold, really is.
Gary.
Yes, and just commenting on Quilp and his death, what I find interesting is he is demonic while Nell is angelic.
Yes.
And in a sense, a character foil for each other. And his death, of course, we don't hear any more about him. He just drowns alone, whereas she, in contrast, is surrounded by support. So I'm finding that interesting, that contrast between those two.
Yes, and it lends itself to the allegorical reading of the novel.
Yeah.
Yes, Kathy.
I was just going to say, from the question that the first moderator asked at the very beginning about, you know, did everything come alive at the end? And maybe this has been mentioned too, but, you know, it's almost like Dickens was learning himself to write better throughout this book. And, you know, the writing at least to me, more, it makes the plot more interesting to me at the end, and he really carves people out. So it's just a comment,
I wanted to read just a couple of paragraphs from the end of chapter 67, which is the description of Quilp's death. I won't read the whole thing. I'll sort of pick it up with the paragraph. It's on page 512, if you're in the Penguin edition. And I'm going to read the last 3 paragraphs of that chapter, which is where Quilp meets his end. And I'll call attention in advance to the way in which the pronouns are used in this passage, particularly the pronoun he and the pronoun it, and the way in which those 2 pronouns become interchangeable as Quilp ceases to be a living person and becomes a corpse. So you can read along if you want, end of chapter 67, or you can just listen to it. So this is: the strong tide filled his throat and bore him on upon its rapid current. Another mortal struggle, and he was up again, beating the water with his hands and looking out with wild and glaring eyes that showed him some black object he was drifting close upon. The hull of a ship. He could touch it. He could touch its smooth and slippery surface with his hand. One loud cry now, but the restless water bore him down before he could give it utterance, and driving him under it, carried away a corpse. It toyed and sported with its ghastly freight, now brushing, now bruising it against the slimy piles, now hiding it in mud or long rank grass, now dragging it heavily over rough stones and gravel, now feigning to yield it to its own element, and in the same action, luring it away until, tired of the ugly plaything, it flung it on a swamp, a dismal place where pirates had to swing in chains through many a wintry night, and left it there to bleach. And there it lay alone. The sky was red with flame, and the water that bore it there had been tinged with the sullen light as it flowed along. The place the deserted carcass had left so recently, a living man, was now a blazing ruin. There was something of the glare upon its face. The hair, stirred by the damp breeze, played in a kind of mockery of death, such a mockery as the dead man himself would have reveled in when alive. About its head, and its dress fluttered idly in the night wind.
Oh, it's really cool.
Yeah, and the it is intrusive throughout that those paragraphs. Sometimes the it is the water, the river. Sometimes the it is the ship's hull that he bumps up against. Sometimes the it is sky. Sometimes it's the house. But ultimately, the it is Quilp himself. And there it lay alone. So this is, I think, going back to what David said at the beginning, that part of what energizes this section of the book is the writing. It's the prose.
Yeah.
This is, when we look at the Old Curiosity Shop, in many ways, it's an awkward book. The motivations, the improbabilities of certain of the characters, the way that it sort of lurches from one plot to another plot. All of these are a novelist who's learning his trade. But when you read a passage like this, the scene of Quilp's death, I think you can see the power of the young Dickens. This is an extraordinary writer, and despite its unevenness, I think there are many things in The Old Curiosity Shop in which we can see the great writer that Dickens will become. Well, Kathy, you have your hand up. I'll give you the last word. You and Glenn.
Yeah. Well, to answer, I think it's Catherine's comment. I'm not sure, but I think it was Catherine that, she was unsatisfied, with his death. And when you read that passage, he had a horrible death. I mean, Dickens in his writing gives him, the environment literally scrapes him along the bottom, over the rocks, into the marsh, and eventually just almost on fire in the last passage. And he does have a really gruesome, brittle, horrible death. So he gets his comeuppance.
And we can think of other deaths that happened to villains in other novels. In Martin Chuzzlewit, Jonas Chuzzlewit, Carker in Dombey and Son, and others. So, Glenna.
I was just going to say, I loved your concept of communities of care. I was thinking about how Mrs. Jarley belongs in that community.
Yes.
And I'm hoping that next time when we sum up, that you can return to that theme and let us think really broadly about who belongs in that community.
Okay, good. Well, friends, thank you very much. Thank you, Wayne. I'll see you next month as we conclude The Old Curiosity Shop.
Thank you, Wayne and John.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.